welcome to Religion Off the Beaten Track with Robin Douglas, a podcast on the lesser-known aspects of religion and belief.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Religion Off the Beaten Track. I'm your host, Robin Douglas, and today I don't have a guest with me. This is going to be a solo show. The first solo show, in fact. In this show, we're going to be looking at an eccentric Victorian by the name of Charles Maurice Davies. Davies lived from 1828 to 1910, and he was a clergyman, a writer, and a teacher. He was a significant figure in the history of religion in Britain, but he's largely forgotten today. Let's start by looking at Davies's life. Davies was born in Somerset, and he was educated at Durham University, where he received the degree of Doctor of Divinity. He was ordained as a priest of the Church of England, and he gravitated to the Catholic wing of Anglicanism. He was a founder member of a major Anglo-Catholic organisation called the Society of the Holy Cross. That was a body with occult overtones, which we may return to in a future episode. Davies then became a liberal Anglican, and his Christian faith came to be complemented by an interest in esoteric spirituality. He cultivated a long-term interest in spiritualism, which was fashionable in England in the Victorian period. In his middle age, in the early 1880s, Davies attempted the bold experiment of founding a spiritualistic form of Christianity. This entailed setting up an organisation called the Guild of the Holy Spirit. His practices combined prayer services and seances. Spiritualistic ideas were mixed together with the Anglican Book of Common Prayer, hymns, and even readings from Cardinal Newman. Davies said that the key to my whole position was the combination of mysticism with the Christian services of the Church of England. After 1882, Davies's religious and spiritual interests appear to have declined. He ceased from active ministry in the Church of England, and he mostly left spiritualism alone, although his wife Jane went on to join the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the leading Victorian occult society. Davies also allowed his home to be used by a Christian mystical society called the Order of the Spiritual Temple. In 1895, he published an anonymous work entitled The Great Secret, in which he recounted his personal experiences with the paranormal. Davies retired in 1901 and died in 1910. He was buried in the Church of England. Davies's reputation today rests largely on a series of novels that he wrote. He also published translations of classical Greek and Roman texts, and he supervised a series of translations by others. But for present purposes, we're mostly concerned with a different part of his work, a series of books known as Unorthodox London. These are fascinating books of religious journalism which grew out of articles that Davies had published in the Daily Telegraph and elsewhere. One of Davies's occupations was that of a journalist, and that got him arrested as a spy while he was covering the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. The Unorthodox London series is a hugely valuable exercise in ethnography, although its journalistic origins mean that it's written in an ironic, conversational tone, for which Davies was criticised at the time. The series is sometimes referred to as a source by historians, but it's not been given all that much sustained study in its own right. The series consists of 4 separate books. First, there is Unorthodox London itself, which was published in 1873. This book deals with a broad sweep of contemporary religious life, from the free-thinking atheists of South Place to C.H. Spurgeon's authoritarian evangelical megachurch. Davies visits Quakers, Plymouth Brethren, Orthodox Greeks, Moravians and Christadelphians. He attends several Roman Catholic liturgies and goes to several Jewish synagogues. The second book is Orthodox London, which was also published in 1873. This focuses specifically on the Church of England. It contains accounts of different forms of Anglican worship across the spectrum of high, low, and broad church. The third book in the series is Heterodox London, from 1874. This is supposedly dedicated to advocates of what Davies called free thought, although it also contains chapters dealing with other groups, including Mormons and vegetarians. The fourth and final book in the series is Mystic London, which was published in 1875. Despite the title, the majority of the book is not to do with mystical religion, and indeed much of it is not religious in nature at all. It includes, for example, an eyewitness account of an execution. What it does say, however, is quite revealing of Davies's own history and beliefs, as we shall see. It's sometimes said that modern Western culture offers a spiritual supermarket, in which the buyer can browse the shelves for products from around the world before making a selection and taking them home to consume. Davies's work highlights the fact that Victorian London offered just as much of a spiritual supermarket as the modern-day city. He writes in Unorthodox London, "At no period of history, probably, since the schools of religion and philosophy jostled one another in the streets of Alexandria, have the forms of religious life been more exuberant and diversified than in London at the present time." There's a similar observation in the same book, in his account of the fundamentalist Protestant sect known as the Plymouth Brethren. "As I emerged from the priory, I saw the congregation coming out of Unity Church, Upper Street, where Babu Keshub Chunder Sen, the Hindu reformer, had been enlightening the Unitarians on the doctrines of the Brahmo Samaj, whilst a little lower down, another was beginning to besiege the doors of the agricultural hall, where Ned Wright was to preach to the working men." In Orthodox London, Davies returned to the same theme. "In Western London, every shade and colour of religious belief may be found. Around the beautiful pro-cathedral at Kensington, a Catholic population has sprung up, just as around the cathedral close in ancient times. Ritualists, that is, High Church Anglicans, throng the frequent services and swell the teeming coffers of St Mary Magdalene's, Paddington. The synagogue and the kirk, that is the Scottish Presbyterian Church, stand wall to wall in the Harrow Road, and the New Jerusalem Church, that is the group that followed Emanuel Swedenborg, has stationed its apostle, Dr. Bailey, almost under the shadow of the vicarage elms in the Old Court suburb." An interesting passage in Mystic London, a testimony from an anonymous working man, sheds some light on the sort of shopper who partook of the Victorian spiritual supermarket. "He had for 32 years been brought up in the Church of England, but had found no conversion there. He had no wish to speak against the Church, but such was the case. He wandered about a good deal in those years, from Roman Catholic to Old Methodist chapels, but the latter settled him. He was attending a class meeting in Kensal New Town one night, and suddenly a determination came over him that he would not sleep that night until he had kneeled down and prayed with his wife, though it would be the first time he had done so for 32 years. When it came to bedtime, his courage failed him. He could not get into bed, and he did not like to tell his wife why. That, he said, was the devil worriting me. His wife said, 'I know what's the matter with you. You want to pray. We will see what we can do.' His wife, he told us, was unconverted, but still she throwed open the door on that occasion. He never knew happiness, he said, until he came to Jesus. And he added, "Oh, I do love my Jesus." As this account suggests, Davies was incorrigibly middle class and was capable of being a little patronising to the other classes of English society. Here, for example, are his thoughts on the Christadelphians. "I was amazed to hear working men read and expound from their thumbed Bibles, showing the most complete familiarity with the sacred text. I listened to their sermons and lectures, and thought how well it was for them to be there, since very possibly more elaborate faiths would have failed to comprehend them. I joined in the singing of their simple hymns, and looked on at their homely breaking of bread, not without thoughts that it might typify more nearly than gorgeous rituals the original supper." There are many other examples that could be given of Davies's adventures. He met a trio of Mormons, one of whom was a polygamist. He described the ceremony of a Catholic nun taking the veil. He made a visit to the Great Synagogue. But the most intriguing passages of his books are those that deal with the paranormal. All of the books in the Unorthodox London series have some content on spiritualism and the occult, but the subject is mostly dealt with in Mystic London. It's the latter part of the book that contains the mystic material. Davies visits an astrologer, who seems to get a number of things right about him. He attends public demonstrations given by two eccentric young women, who would go on to become quite well known in esoteric circles: the medium Anna Eva Fay, whom he correctly identifies as a fraud, and the mesmerist and alternative medicine advocate Chandos Leigh Hunt. Davies writes about several spiritualist seances. One of these is held in company with a barrister and a former Catholic priest. The participants summon up a spirit who moves the table violently and claims to be Satan. Another seance involves contact with spirits who seem to be followers of the doctrines of the Swedish mystic Emanuel Swedenborg. In fact, Davies and his wife had a long history of engaging in paranormal activities. Davies recounts how he'd experimented with seances as long ago as 1856-7, and how in 1865 he seemed to have made contact with the spirit of his newly deceased son. This contact was apparently renewed the following year at a spiritualist sitting. He gave the following account. In December 1866, I went to the Marshalls, who were Victorian spiritualists. Entering as an entire stranger, and sitting down at the table, I saw some strong physical manifestations, a large table being poised in space, in full light, for some seconds. It was signified there was a spirit present who wished to communicate, and the message given by raps to me was, "Will you try to think of us more than you have done?" I asked the name, and my child's was correctly given, though I had not been announced, and I have no reason to believe my name was known. The place where he passed away from earth was also correctly specified. In addition, Davies reported an apparent encounter with another of his deceased children, although an attempt to repeat the experience failed. Davies's own views at the time at which he was writing are somewhat elusive. The ironic tone that he uses helps to obscure his true convictions, although he does say that these had evolved over the years. He positions himself as an inquirer, and he is not afraid to make it clear when he thinks someone is a fraud. But he also affirms that he knows of no naturalistic explanation for some of the things which he has encountered, including the levitations of Daniel Douglas Home, which he saw as an eyewitness. He does not accept, however, that the causes of such things are fully understood. In particular, he gives his verdict as not proven on the spiritualist belief that seances really do involve contact with disembodied spirits. When he tries to put one medium to the test, he gets the usual mixture of uncanny hits, possible lucky guesses, and outright misses. This is what he says. I had provided myself with 2 locks of hair. I handed her the first, and she immediately proceeded to describe a series of tableaux which appeared to pass through her mind. She kept handling the lock of hair and said, "The person to whom this belongs is ill, weak," which was true enough, but might, I thought, be a shot. She then described a bedroom, with some person, she could not see what person, lying in bed, and a lady in a blue dress bending over her. This, again, I thought might flow out as a deduction from her premises of the her belonging to an invalid. The blue dress was correct enough, but still so little special as to be a very possible coincidence. She then, however, startled me by saying, "I notice this, that on the table by the bedside, where the bottles of medicine are standing, milk has been spilt, a large quantity, and not wiped up." This was a trivial detail, not known to me at the time, but confirmed on subsequent inquiry. She then passed on to describe a second tableau, where the same person in the blue dress was in a room all hung over with plates, along with a gentleman whom she described very accurately. He was the occupant of the house where the patient lay, and, having a hobby for old china, had turned his dining room into a sort of crockery shop. With the second lock of hair we failed utterly. She was quite positive they came from different people. I am sorry to say they both came from the same person. If all this seems incongruous with Davies's position as an Anglican priest, he affirms that belief in spiritualism was found among clergymen of all denominations, although he does also acknowledge that the orthodox clerical view was that the phenomenon was a deception of the devil. He states his position that belief in spiritual phenomena is compatible with Anglicanism. He points out that the Church of England explicitly acknowledges the efficacy of the occultic practice of exorcism in its own canon law. The Church of England, of course, did not end up going in the spiritualistic direction that Davies wanted it to. Looking back, on the whole, Davies stands out as an eccentric figure. But, in both his life and his writings, he's a fascinating representative of the eclectic religious scene of Victorian London. He deserves, I think, to be better known today.
You have been listening to Religion Off the Beaten Track with Robin Douglas. Remember to follow us on Twitter and Facebook.